Suzanne's Paparazzi Jewelry, 24/7 shopping available. 160920 is the code. Show her some love, like she showed us. K&A Custom Crafts on Facebook.
So hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of a Whatever on Wednesday. And I'm here with a special guest, Alexandra Hanley, and I want to welcome her to the guest. Hi, Alex. You're on mute. Hi, Alex. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Where it's our pleasure. And I want to give the listeners a little bit of a preview and why I asked Alex to come and join us. Whatever on Wednesday, we're not limited to any topic or genre. That's the beauty of this program. And I also am the host of another podcast, Adversity to Inspiration, which is a recorded podcast and all about people who have overcome adversity and come out through the other side and with some type of personal growth and development or making a positive impact in the world. And as part of that series, I have dedicated the entire month of August on that program to in honor and remembrance of the September 11th attacks. And because I am a New Yorker and it's a very personal story for me, I was actually slated to be there that morning, but my meeting was canceled. So it's very poignant. I recently went there, right? Actually, before, and we can talk a little bit about that, but I went back to the World Trade Center for a meeting and right before COVID actually hit, and I stood on those floors and looked out at the view, and I envisioned what it must have been like for those individuals who are standing there looking at that amazing view, knowing that it was that their lives were imminently in danger, and most of them up at that level did not survive. So I think it's very significant for me. Alex's father actually was at the World Trade Center that day, and his story is not mine to tell, and neither is hers. So I'm going to hand the mic over to her and like, tell us a little bit about yourself, Alex, and tell us about your experience that day.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I'm actually kind of surprised I volunteered to do this because it's not something I really volunteer to talk about. I usually avoid talking about it, but I just felt a nudge in my heart that this was time to talk about it. So my whole family, myself included, is from New York. And my parents moved to Princeton Junction, New Jersey, mostly a commuter town for people working in the city who wanted to raise kids in the suburbs with a nice school district while still being able to commute to the city easily. So should I just jump into the story now?
Sure, let's jump in. We have a few viewers on, and people may ask us questions as we go along the way, and I may interject. I'm good at doing that. So,
Okay.
so if you need a moment, but no, it's your story, it's your platform, and I'm gonna give you the mic until
Right.
I feel it, until you need my help.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you. So I was 14. I was a freshman in high school. And the high school actually had like an open concept plan. So there were not really any walls. And the idea was if you were in a classroom, then you could overhear subconsciously what was being taught in the other classrooms. So I was in a classroom that was in like one of the main areas. So there were a lot of other classrooms around. And I was in history class, I remember, with my best friend, Erica, at the time. And came on the loudspeaker that the World Trade Centers in New York were being bombed. And my dad worked in Financial Center 2, which is actually right across the street. So I had turned to my friend Erica and I said, "Oh my gosh, my dad." And she's like, "I'm sure he's fine." So I didn't really know what to do. So I just stayed there. And I remember my history teacher started to talk about JFK. And I just remember being like annoyed about it. I don't know why we didn't really get along, but I was just like thinking about my dad, and I was upset that she was changing the topic. And then my brother, who was a senior there, we didn't have the best relationship at the time because I was like the annoying little sister. He came to get me, And he said, our dad works there. Alex has to come with us. And I just remember him like starting to cry and hugging me, which was, that's when it really hit me that it was a really bad situation for my dad, because that wasn't the kind of relationship my brother and I had at the time. Now we're close, but not then. So we went to the office. They asked everyone whose parents worked down there to come to the office. And like I said, it was a commuter town, so there were a lot of people, and they were just taking turns trying to call our parents, and they really couldn't get through to anybody. And then they just put us in like an auditorium, all of us together in the auditorium, to watch on like a big screen the news as it was happening. And I don't think that was a good idea, because it was really upsetting to watch. Like, I saw the second tower fall live, and there were students screaming and fainting, and it wasn't a good situation. My father did survive, but other students, some of their parents didn't, and they were in that auditorium watching.
Yeah, so that's a very difficult story. I mean, I can tell you a little bit. I think that anybody who is alive today knows exactly where they were that day. I
Yeah.
actually worked for a criminal justice agency at the time in the capital of New York, and I remember my husband actually works in New York, and he had called me that morning, and he said a small commuter plane hit the World Trade Center, and he could see it from his job site, and he's an iron worker, and the iron workers are really instrumental in helping build New York back up after the attacks. But he and the gentleman that he worked with said, last time I spoke to him, he said, we're going to go down and we're going to go see if we can help. And the same, I had a very similar experience that you did. I went into the next offices, and I was watching live from the executive suite, and I watched. I could not get a hold of him after that. I thought he was down there at the site. I watched the buildings fall as well, and it's very nerve-wracking, extremely nerve-wracking. And I think that, again, I waited to say, I don't know when you heard from your father again, but it was hours before I heard from him again. And I think just sitting there, imagining, watching that tragedy, just envisioning your loved one not surviving. So certainly I feel some of that story. So I recognize some of that pain that you felt, but certainly not as a young child. I mean, you were a child and amongst other children. And yeah, that must have been terrifying, certainly.
Yeah, I didn't find out until later that night. My mom was going to Staten Island that day, so she was stuck on the highway, and she was watching it while it was happening from the highway, and no one could get a hold of him. And so I didn't know. And then school ended, and I didn't want to go home, so I just stayed. And there were like payphones at school, and I used to call my dad every day at lunch. So I just kept calling his office on the payphone after school. And then eventually I had to go home, and right before I had gotten home, my mom had gotten in touch with him and found out that he was okay. So he came home a couple days later.
And I don't know if you've listened to any of the other individuals who were on my series, and most of them actually were, well, all of them actually, except for the exception of one woman, were children who actually lost their parents in the World Trade Center that day. And they speak about it, and I think that this is very significant, especially with the 20th anniversary coming up. People, someone such as myself, and I think that what happens throughout the course of the next month is that we will see nonstop footage of that day. We're going to see the footage, we're going to see the interviews, we're going to see where are they now. And those individuals, and we spoke about it, and I felt it was very poignant, whereas someone like myself, who certainly is impacted by it, but from a distance, we made that vow that day, never forget. We're never going to forget. And the reality is, on that day, they don't have the opportunity to grieve privately, because it's a national incident, and we're all trying to honor that vow. But the reality is, they said that they try to disappear, and they would prefer not to relive that moment
Right.
every single year. And I don't know how that impacts your life, or if you feel the same way.
Yeah, it's very silent at my house at 9/11. We don't talk about it at all. I think my mom does a little bit, but it's just not something that we talk about. I tell my dad on 9/11 that I'm thinking of him, I'm here for him, but we just don't talk about it.
So even if you don't talk about it, it's impossible to avoid. And I think that that's something I'd really like the viewers and the listeners to understand, that there are families who are still impacted by that occurrence. And actually, I work uh, in disaster recovery, and the World Trade Center is one of those disasters. And people don't realize that's still an ongoing disaster. I mean, we still have first responders who have medical, and not even just first responders, but volunteers, people who went out of their way to help because they felt as if compelled to do something. And many of them are losing their lives today. So I think that I think we should be mindful of all of those intricacies as well, and try to, we want to honor and respect the people such as your father, but at the same time, we should recognize that they are all should be afforded a degree of
Yeah.
privacy and respect and compassion and consideration on September 11th and throughout the entire month. I mean, this year in particular, it's the 20th anniversary. So of course it's going to be in the spotlight, and now we have and we try to steer away from politics here on Coast to Coast, but now we have the whole issue of what's happening in Afghanistan, and that's going to broaden that topic and that subject and put an entirely different spin on it. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's what I expect is going to happen. I expect it's going to be more sensationalized than ever, and it's unfortunate because this really should be a moment of reverence and an homage to those victims and survivors.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I mean, our family and lots of families have needed to do a lot of healing around this. And I know that for me, I had to find forgiveness, and I had a spiritual awakening a few years ago. And in that process, I was able to forgive a lot of the anger that I had, that someone tried to kill my dad. Is how I felt about it. And that's really where I have been able to start to find peace.
So let's speak about, and has your father been able to find any peace? And I know we spoke about it before we came on air, and we're going to tread lightly because that's his story, and out of respect for him, you want to honor that and then respect his privacy. But well, tell us about him. I'm sure he must be a remarkable man to have come out of that on the other side, and it sounds like he was a wonderful father. So
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about him.
yeah, he's the strongest person I know. Um, he didn't go back to work after that. He tried to, but he had PTSD, and he thought it would be best if he didn't for his mental health. And they actually ended up moving away up to New England because how much it was affecting the family and them. And I felt like I lost him for a few years. Um, just kind of became a bit of a shell for a while. I don't know what it was like, what he went through. I can't imagine. And there was a lot tied up in it for him too, because his dad died in the Trade Center too. His dad was an inspector when it was being built, and he died in the stairwell trying to get to the roof while he was doing an inspection. And so I think that there was a lot tied up in that as well. And I never met him.
Yeah, so well, and I'm sorry for your loss. I mean, that's a tremendous, and I'm all about I'm a mindset geek, but when you think about that interconnection, you have two traumatic events in the same building, the intricacies of that and the impact that it certainly must have had with on your father. And we can't speculate. We're just speculating on what he went through, but certainly, yeah, it does sound like he's a very strong man. But when you think about it in just respects into what you said, and here your father is a survivor, and I think that survivors are viewed just a little bit differently than those who were lost. And I think many of them also have, I've read about this, the survivor's guilt. Why was I the one to come out? And that's also very difficult for them to process. But here there are these children such as yourself and many almost all of them, of course, they're at least 20. Some of them were just born, and I've spoken with some children who never even knew their parents. But in your case, here you are, your father survived, but the reality is so much was taken from you. You know, your childhood really went on a different trajectory and had an entirely different blueprint than what would have happened. You know, he couldn't work, and he was suffering from PTSD. I mean, and I want to tread lightly because I know it's very emotional for you, but what does that do to a child? And I think that people don't understand the collateral damage, and that really was, you know, children's childhoods were squandered, and that's such a deep and resonating pain. And I don't want to exploit that. But you but I want you to share what you feel comfortable sharing.
Um, I felt like for a while it just destroyed our family. Um, you know, I'm so glad he's still here. I mean, he's like my person, you know. I love him so much. I'm so glad he's here, but it's like you say, it changed, you know, where we were headed as a family into a different path. And of course, not going back to work changed a lot. But I see how strong he is and what he pulled out of, and seeing that, I think, has made me a strong person and has shaped me into wanting to help people. And yeah, I mean, it made me unsure, you know, of what could happen, you know, thinking that, you know, everything was secure as, you know, a teenager, and then kind of seeing what could happen just from one event, and seeing, you know, security being taken away.
So
Yeah.
let me ask you this. I mean, because of that, and I remember something much different, but uh, for instance, when I was a teenager, there was a serial killer on the loose in New York City, and I think that, you know, that really it may sound outlandish, but it really formed so much of my childhood because for many years, and I think it was really a year span actually. Uh, I was fearful that although he was in New York City and I was in upstate New York, it wasn't going to happen. But as a child, I manifested this alternate reality that, you know, that David Berkowitz was going to come to my town and shoot my family and shoot me. And I think that I really lived a fear-based life, and it shaped so much of my mentality and my actions. I was shy and timid and afraid to do things. I mean, did you find that you were preoccupied with fear, and it influenced the way that you functioned and lived life?
I was always afraid that my dad would be taken from me. So I'm very, very protective of him. And I think it came from that. And so
That's a tough one.
yeah, I mean, I think that that's my fear, is something happening to him. That's what I learned from it. Yeah, and that, you know, if I also learned that if there's a sense of security that can be gone in a flash too. A change of events can change that. That also changed my sense of security. I know who you're talking about because my mom told me about that. And she was living in New York, and she said growing up, she was so scared of that.
And it really isn't funny. He really did
No.
terrorize the city, and but you're right, especially for young people. And if your mom was growing up, and that was really a significant time in the history of New York. And there are so many, of course, there are so many things I think about even today, and the impact that COVID is going to have. I have three young sons, and what's the long lasting impacts of that? You know, I mean, my children were afraid that their grandparents were going to die, and they didn't understand math and were fearful of their lives in the beginning, and that may have long ranging PTSD impacts on the children of today. Not even so much COVID, but because the reality was that really didn't trickle down to children too often, but the restrictions, and this is a significant moment in their history that they're going to have to face as well. So really your story is about triumph, you had a heartfelt awakening that you spoke about, and I don't know if you want to share it with the listeners, and you came out on the other side, and your goal and ambitions are to help others, which is admirable. And so we speak about it. It's certainly a tragedy, and I've spoken to many people who really turned that tragedy into something meaningful, and it propelled their life in a direction where they're of service. And so tell us about that part of your story, and how you come out and what you're doing, and
Yeah.
the good part.
Well, I was angry. Like, I was really angry for a long time. I remember, like, right after it happened, like, being really, like, pro military. I was like a 14-year-old, like, all about, like, the military and stuff like that, and just very angry. And then, that kind of softened up a little bit over time. But then I had an awakening a few years ago, and I had this immense just release and forgiveness of, like, things that I had been holding, not just, with the anger from 9/11, but all sorts of anger that I had been holding in my life, a lot of it misguided, because a lot of it with 9/11 too was a bit misguided. And I was able to release that. And I'm, a spiritual mentor now. And I think a lot of it is choosing love over fear. Um, a lot of this comes down to that. A lot of choices that we make, and when we're faced with, adversity, choosing love over fear.
And what are some practical strategies on how to do that? I think that oftentimes we speak about these strategies, and how does one accomplish that? I mean, I know for me, I believe that it just starts with the decision. The decision is always easy, and I always speak about that. Changing your behavior is as simple as making a decision. But then, of course, it's the implementation that really you need to back it up with some concrete actions. And oftentimes we're not motivated to do that. I think fear, and when we speak about fear, fear is so widespread. Fear can limit you professionally. It can limit you in regard to a relationship. It can, limit even your desire to want to have children. So oftentimes I hear people say, "Oh, I don't want to have children because I'm going to screw them up, or the world is a screwed up place." But when you live from a place of fear, you really limit your life. So, what is something that people can do, to a concrete strategy to help them begin to overcome the things that they're afraid of?
I would say number one is like limiting outside stimuli, like major media sources. I mean, even just with the story of when they put us into the auditorium with watching the news, like major media sources are very fear invoking. So I think limiting that is a major one. Spending time with meditation, even just a few minutes every day, brings us inside of ourselves so that we can recalibrate to the here, to the now, and not be distracted by the things around us, because all of those things, they start to get distorted and they start to blow up, and the wheels start turning in our head. But when we can pause, even just for 5 minutes, breathe, meditate, kind of shut off some of that mass media, I think that's helpful. Those are good places to start.
I agree. And I think that you just said a brilliant point, that really fear, we spend so much time being afraid of things that just never come to fruition. We manifest and we spin these stories and dialogues in our head, and our internal dialogue is so important, and it really transforms our lives. And I think that that's really one of the keys, in my opinion, and I certainly give this advice whenever anyone asks, is to just simply live in the moment. If you're concentrating on the past, some things that you cannot change, you're not going to be able to propel your life forward. And if you're envisioning the future, or worrying about what's going to happen in the future, and most of the times those things, what does worry accomplish? I mean, worry is a waste of time, and I know that's so much easier said than done. I'm a reformed overthinker, and I say that, but I say it with a caveat that there are times that I get swept up into that mentality. I still do that, but I recognize the detriment of it now. If you start to overthink and overanalyze, first of all, most of the time it doesn't come true. You can run every scenario in your head, good or bad, but but I think it's also taking a risk and a chance on yourself. Sometimes you just have to take a chance and you can overcome fear. And this may surprise you, but a few months ago, you would have never seen me on a live program. And there are videos
Oh, really?
out no, I would not have spoken, and the gentleman at Coast to Coast, my Coast to Coast family invited me to do a live show. I would do the recorded shows. I was very scripted. I would edit every line. I would spend maybe 4 or 5 hours editing a 30-minute podcast or an hour podcast. I spend more time editing than interviewing because I wanted to sound perfect, and it's
Right.
funny now. And now I'm on live, 5 or 6 hours a week.
Oh,
And
wow.
I don't have any hesitation. So that's something of facing my fear. It's now I'm not concerned if my, as you know, I hopped on camera right beforehand. My hair was a mess. It's still a mess. I was running in late, but I'm like, I'm just going to jump on. If somebody doesn't like the way my hair looks today, well, that's just the reality. That's how it goes. So I think growth and evolution can happen at any age, and I think you're a shining example that not only can it happen in circumstances that aren't under duress. Look at even your father. I mean, think about the limitations that he had, and now he's back to work. So I think that that's really, and I don't know if you can speak to how that came about, but I think that that is something that he should be so proud of. And I think that probably for him, and I don't want to speak to it, but as a mindset coach, I'm thinking to myself, there may have been times when he thought to himself, why aren't I getting back out there? I just can't do it. Am I weak? And the reality is, in this moment in time, it's such a demonstration of strength because every minute that you wait, it gets so much more difficult. And think about how miraculous that is and how wonderful it is that he was able to do that. I think it's really a testament to his character. And I think that that's something to be applauded and celebrated, and I think that that's just amazing.
I totally agree. I think that, he took care of his mental health first because, like I said, we had lost him for a little while, and to be a good dad and good husband and be there with us, he had to take care of his mental health. So that involved, like I said, the move away from the city and from the tri-state, and taking, the time that he needed to get right again before going back to work. And I think that it's probably really hard for him to take off those years and know that he had to do that, to nurture himself, to take care of himself. But he did.
And he had the resiliency to do that. Now let's speak about the rest of your family. I mean, what about your siblings and your mother? I mean, that must have been such a traumatic day for your mom. Envisioning the loss of your father, and also then now you have the responsibility as a sole parent, as a single parent. And how do you tell your children that? I mean, imagine so many things must have been going through her mind, and it must have been certainly a traumatic day for her as well, and a traumatic recovery. Was she able to recover and bounce back? And how did that impact your life?
Yeah, it definitely was traumatic for her. We were talking about it earlier, over some tears. And, I think it's still because, we haven't talked about it that much in our family. When it's brought up, it still feels really raw. So I would say, as a suggestion to others, that if there is something like under the surface, an elephant in the room, to try and talk about it if possible, because, we do experience that rawness still when it comes up and it's uncomfortable. But yeah, she was, like I said, she was on the highway, and she had jobs there and, connections there too. And when she saw the towers fall, she figured that he had passed. And then she made it back to Jersey, and she just couldn't get through to anybody. And she, didn't update the school or anything because she didn't know what to say or how to say it. She knew we were safe at school. And then she eventually got through to my grandmother's work because she worked in the city. She lived in the city, and my father had run all the way uptown, well, to Chelsea. And my mother got through to her work, and they said that, oh, her son was just there. My mom was like, which son? But found out it was him. So that's how she found out he was all right.
So we have a great comment from one of the viewers, Will Polson, and he said, "Both of you women are strong and beautiful. Hope you're all doing amazing." So
Oh,
so thank you, Will.
thank
That's
you.
very sweet. and I'm a big fan of Will's, so he's also
Aw.
on the network. So I feel the same way about you, Will. So thanks so much for hopping on. And I think that when I think about what these stories and the resiliencies and some of the one of the children I spoke to, he had a very similar story to yours. He was 13 and he was at school, but the difference was his father was actually he was a property manager at 2 World Trade Center, and the difference for him was and I think about this, and it certainly makes me very sad, and he feels compelled to speak about it as well because he wanted to share his story of triumph the same way, and you're beacons of light who are coming out and helping others just show them that you can overcome adversity, especially because you're still young people. He was 13 at the time. But he went to school in Pennsylvania. So his parents were actually divorced. So the school was watching, the teachers turned on, and they had no idea that anyone in the school had an intimate tie. So they did not turn off the television, and they watched the planes hit, the towers fall, and he just was mesmerized by that. And he raised his hand and he said, "My dad works there." And then they shut down the TV. But and his story is really very tragic in so many ways. And his mother called the school and said, dad went back in. And I'm going to give him a shout out, John Lynch and his brother Mark. So the school called and said, and the mom called and said, dad called, he's out, he got out and he escaped and he's fine. And so he was relieved, but his father went back in. So he made the call and told his family that he was fine. And so they were so relieved. And because he knew the building so intricately, he went back in to help save other people. And they had to have a timeline of where he was in the building because other people that he rescued and helped get out said Bobby was, at the South Tower staircase, or he was on floor 2. So they know exactly where he went and the people that he helped to rescue. And unfortunately, he didn't make it. And I think that they had the inflated relief that he was out, and then they were plummeted back into the depths of despair. And I think that's such a demonstration of how that day was. I mean, there were such highs and lows. So I think it was very, very difficult. Obviously, it was very difficult, but I think for children across the spectrum. And then one of the other children, his brother actually, he had just been born, so he was only a few months old. And his story is, my brother has all these memories of my father, but I have none. So I think that it's such a diverse tragedy in so many respects, and of course, and it's just one that continues to linger on. So we appreciate you sharing it with us, and we have somebody else coming on, and I believe it's Adam. I hope you two are having a great night so far. We're having a good night, but we're actually having a very serious conversation. And most of the time on this network, I try to keep it light, but I think this is very important, and I wanted to share a little bit more of my serious side here because I do think the 20th anniversary in particular is something that I really want to honor, and people like your father and your family. Um, and Will's exactly right. He's saying crazy to think I'm not even old enough to have memories of this day, yet it means so much to me and many others my age. And actually, one of our very own and I don't want to reveal his name, but he serves our country, and we're so proud of him for that. And he's one of the folks on the network. And even today, let's try. And I don't want to wade too much into Afghanistan because I'm a humanitarian. I always say I err on the side of life. I'm not a politician, and I'm not politically driven in any way. But I've seen some interviews in the past couple of weeks, and I think that it really the people and there's survivors, they're military children who have a similar story that after September 11th their parents were sent to Afghanistan to defend the country, and they lost their lives, and now many of them are starting to feel as if those losses were in vain because we're almost back where we were at square one. And I don't know how that impacts somebody, and I don't know if your father spoke about it or what your thoughts are. I don't want to get too crazy about it. I want to tread lightly, but I think that is an important component of it. I don't want to get into the political ramifications or aspects of another war, but it looks like that's inevitable. We can't. I don't imagine we're just going to abandon that country. There'll be too much political backlash. But
Mhm.
what do you think about those children? And it's a similar story, similar but different, very very different, but certainly intertwined and interconnected because it was all emanated with that tragedy.
Right. Devastating. I mean, to see things moving backward in any way and is upsetting. I'm sorry, of course, to anyone who's been affected and lost their life in any area of all of this.
And Adam is saying it was a traumatic experience, and almost everybody
Yeah.
remembers what they were doing the day it happened. And early on in the show, I spoke exactly about that. I knew I could tell you exactly where I
Mhm.
was and what I was doing that day. So
So
yeah,
my dad
please,
hasn't said anything about it. Like I said, it's
you
just
avoid
like
it.
something that's avoided still. But interestingly, and thank you from this podcast, I brought it up to them. So we did open up some more channels of communication, which I think opens up for more healing.
I do too, and I think that grief and I think this is such an important point. Grief is such a personal process, and in your family, it's taken 20 years to just really start to open that channel. And I think some of it too, and I don't want to speak for mothers or fathers who are raising children who their spouse or their significant other was one of those, but I think they are also trying to spare their children. I mean, that's a difficult conversation with your children because you think, oh my gosh, they were so traumatized, but children are so resilient and curious and they want to know the answers. I mean, I'm speaking with and he's actually going to be on this program live next week, and he lost his father in the World Trade Center as well, and I don't want to tell his whole story, but his life spiraled out of control. He became obsessed with the notion that his father was one of the World Trade Center jumpers. And he was 9 years old. He was scouring the pictures, and he was looking for his dad continuously, and his father wasn't. And what happened was he was, I don't want to reel too much of it, but because he wants to tell his story, but his father, a relative, came in and convinced him that it actually was, uh, and then it really spiraled out of control, and it ended up, what happened to him led to drug addiction, and unfortunately he's on the other side, but it really impacted him in so many ways, and his story is very inspiring. But again, that grief was a 20-year process for him, and it affects adults and children as well. So we want to say, honor your timeline, but don't hold it in because eventually it is going to impact some other part of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then what about your brother? Was his experience the same as yours or similar? And it sounds, did that close bond really start there? I mean, that is something that, you spoke to early on, that you weren't close and he came and embraced you, and the two of you had a cathartic moment. And how did that is difficult for siblings, certainly to,
Yeah,
so how did things transpire between the two of you after that? Are you still close today?
we're very close now. We're very, very close now. It doesn't look anything like it did back in high school. um, yeah, I think that we got stronger and stronger every year, especially after college. So like he went away for college, and I stayed with my parents, and we got a lot closer after that. Yeah.
That's good. And so I think that there's certainly some triumphs there, and I want to say hello to Jason and Justin are watching as well. So thank you. We
I,
see you and we appreciate it. Justin's saying it was a sad day, and it is. I think it's a sad day, but I think at the end of the day, it's so hopeful now. You're on the other side of it. You're changing lives. Tell us how you're doing that. I believe, don't you have yourself a little coaching practice, and you're helping others in the world. So let's talk about that piece of it, how you're instrumental and how you go about helping the other people now that you have developed the skills and came through through the awakening yourself. I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. Well, after my awakening, I really wanted to help other people experience that because it changed my whole life. Like we talked about trajectory earlier, and that's what it did for me. The whole trajectory of my life changed after that awakening. And I went in to become a yoga instructor, and then I just kept learning more and more about spirituality, and I wanted to just share everything I learned with other people. So I do group coaching, I do one-on-one coaching. I designed an energy healing modality, which I train practitioners in. So it's similar to Reiki. Um, and I love animals. They're like my huge, huge passion on this planet. So a lot of what my company does, we donate towards animal charities too. So focusing on the love, the light. Yeah.
So that's very impressive. So here's something to you might want to think about. So there's an organization, and I don't know if you've heard of it, Tuesday's Children. And Tuesday's Children is an organization that has supported the children of 9/11 since day one. They've sent them to college, uh, and they still support them today. And I think that that may be someone you certainly would be someone who they would be attractive to because you certainly resonate with that story. You are a survivor as well, and you may want to approach them, and that might help broaden your base and your audience certainly. And I think that they would certainly love that. They're such a great organization. And actually, Peyton, she has actually wrote a book and she compiled it with all of the children, not all of the children, but numerous children, 20 or 25 children who lost their parents. And her book came out today. I'm going to give her a shout out, Rise from the Ashes. And a portion of the proceeds of her book is going to Tuesday's Children because it is such a great organization. So I think you should reach out to them, tell them your
I
story,
will.
and they would probably, I'm certainly, they maybe they'll want to bring you on board, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll definitely
so
reach out to them.
it's all about who you know. So what else you want to tell us? What else can we talk about? We have 15 more minutes, and September 11th isn't
Yeah.
the entirety of your story. So is there anything else you want to share with us that you find important or interesting, or what do people? Let me ask you this. I mean, does it impact? And you can certainly, if it's too personal, we can certainly shut it down. But has it impacted your dating life at all? I mean, is it a hard story to tell people who you want to become involved with, and because you don't everybody wants to talk about September 11th. I mean, and obviously it's a sensitive topic for your family. I mean, do you have to tell people who you're dating, listen, this is something we don't speak about, or please be mindful of this, or has it impacted your dating life at all, or that realm of your identity?
Yeah, I think that I don't normally talk about it except for this situation. I don't normally talk about it until I've really known someone for a while. Um, but I'm not really dating right now anyway. I'm just focusing on my spirituality, so that kind of clears that up.
All right. Well, you might now. You might get some, you might get some offers here. You know how it goes. We were talking about that earlier. You put yourself out there and you'll probably get, the 150 messages later tonight. I don't
Yeah.
know if they may not be, I don't know how, they may not be up to your standards. We'll leave it at that. But any women on Facebook who are out in the public eye will understand what we're speaking about. So
Yeah.
tell us what the future holds. Well, first of all, how can people get a hold of you? Where do you have a website? Are you a brick and mortar? Are your services virtual?
Yes, virtual. Gracethroughgravity.com is my website. I can be reached right through there. Um, yeah. So like I said, I do the group coaching. I do one-on-one coaching.
And who is your ideal client? Are you mostly geared towards women? Is it a diverse audience? Do men seek out your services as well? I mean, I think that coaching in general, most often, for me, in my experience anyway, women are typically the ones who gravitate toward me and are more geared toward spirituality, at least overtly. Men don't want to admit it, or most likely. But that's what I find. I find that women are certainly more uh, more inclined to reach out to us. And I don't know if that's your experience as well.
I see that a lot in coaching, that it's a lot of women, but I do get a lot of male clients too.
You do,
Um,
okay.
yeah, maybe I've been a little bit timid on this call because of the subject matter, but I have a pretty fiery personality. So I think that, um, that men are okay with that. So it's a good balance.
All right, perfect. You don't have to hold back on our account if you want to let out your fiery side. But so we can't thank you enough for being on the program,
Yeah,
and I certainly want to encourage everybody to reach out to you. It's been a great experience. It's very touching. I think that oftentimes people don't realize what an influence and an impact you're making in the world, and I believe that this conversation will open the doors, and you will be helping viewers and listeners here. So I can't thank you enough for hopping on.
well, thank you for having me. Was healing for me to open up about it and talk about it. I was glad to be here. And I was thinking about earlier, because I had mentioned a few times how my dad is like my hero. I was thinking about some of the things that he did um, to strengthen him, fortify him, get him through all of it. And one of the number one things, in case if anyone's interested, is his sense of humor. He is hilarious, and I think that has really helped him. And he spreads that to other people. Sick, when we've had sick relatives and people in bad situations, he's always the one who will make anyone smile or laugh, bring some light.
Well, I think that there really is truth in the old adage, and most of those old adages are truthful. Laughter really is the best medicine. I I think that in so many circumstances, laughter enhances our lives in so many ways, and I think that probably is one of the things. You're exactly right. That probably propelled him through this, and and somebody recently told me that, and this is funny, and in some ways, he said any gentleman who can make you laugh certainly lights up somebody's life. It doesn't matter what you look like as much as if you can make you laugh, you can get your foot in the door.
Definitely.
And and I think that that's true certainly for me and
Yeah.
and in my personal experience. So your mom must be a lucky woman then.
Yeah, they've been married a long time.
So perfect. I love that too, because that's another part of this story, because there were many families who broke up after September 11th, that they could not sustain that trauma. And many divorces came out of that moment. And it was twofold. Some divorces were because the survivors had the survivor's guilt and they couldn't bring themselves to come to the other side. And in other instances, this is an entirely different topic, and I'd love to speak to somebody about this. The other side, people realized that they were limiting their lives, and they didn't want to hold back. They wanted to live life moving forward, so they didn't want to waste their time on people who weren't gratifying to them, and that they felt as if their lives were limited. So I think that that's very interesting. And I definitely want to. We were speaking about this gentleman earlier, Tim Fielder, saying, "What's up?" Tim
I
is.
can.
He serves our country, and we're very proud of him. And
Thank
and this
you.
is certainly, I'm sure, a personal topic for him. So thanks for hopping on, Tim. And I think that's, you probably didn't hear all of Alex's story, but her father was in the world, not in the tower buildings, but across the street, and I believe it was, what is that called? The two
Well,
um
the financial center too.
yeah, to the financial center, and fortunately he made it out. But we've really been speaking about that tragedy and the triumph. We were talking about the triumph of how the survivors came out, and Alex and her father and many other survivors turned their lives around and came out of that triumph, and are making a positive influence in the world. And her father has certainly made some great strides 20 years later. He's still processing his grief, but so people like you, Tim, really helped help put an ending to that story, and make that story a much different ending than it was a beginning. So thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you.
So I'm going to give you a few minutes to wrap it up, Alex. If there's anything else you want to say, or any other shout outs you want to give.
Mm. I mean, all I can think about with this is two things. First of all, how sorry I am to anyone who's been affected by this, and I just want whoever's been affected by this on any level to know that my heart is with you. My heart goes out to you truly. And also, I'm just think about my family so much and how grateful I am. You were just saying about how some people separated from this event, and it brought us, very, very, very close together. My family is like the biggest blessing in my life, and I love them very, very much. I'm very fortunate to have them, and I'm so thankful to you for bringing me on this show. Thank you. This has been so healing, and it's been so wonderful talking with you.
Thank you. And it was just a stroke of fate. I put it out on a whim, and I actually it had been out there for about 10 days and nobody responded, and you just happened to, and it worked out, and it was perfect timing. And I want to bring up Tim's comment again. He's saying thanks for the support. Awesome. Wow. I don't know if wow is standing for whatever on Wednesday, which is my acronym, or wow, but we're going to take it as both. We're going to take it as both. So thank you, Tim, and thank you. We thank you for your support. So great. I'm glad it was a healing moment for you. It really makes it's a healing moment for me as well when people come on and speak to that. And I think that it made me, even these years later, when I had such intimate ties to that event and those circumstances, that it gives me a sense of closure, and it gives me an entirely different perspective, because now I never thought about it from your vantage point, from the children, I was thinking about it as the never forget. But the reality is, and not that you would ever forget, anybody who lost a loved one is never going to forget, but it does make me appreciate and understand that those families really need some privacy and some closure, and it shouldn't be necessarily the spectacle that it is. That people should be able to grieve on a much smaller scale and in private, and instead of being forced to do so in the media, especially children. And everybody's grown now, but there are people, it's 20 years. There are people who are teenagers. They're 19, 20. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming. It's been my pleasure, and I'm definitely going to keep in touch. I hope you tune in next Wednesday for Matthew. I think that you would find him very interesting, and I think that they may give you a sense of healing as well, because his story is inspirational. And that's a sneak peek of what's to come next week. I'm going to continue the series, and he's an amazing gentleman as well. So please give your love and appreciation to your father and your family, and thanks for sharing your story. It means a lot to us.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And Chris, I want to thank you, of course, for being behind the scenes and the best producer and out there. I always say I never end a show without thanking Chris. So you can play us out, Chris. I appreciate it.